So, yesterday we did a podcast from the roof, and this topic came up. Unfortunately, I didn't have a copy of it, but somebody on Twitter actually did have a copy of the podcast. It's not a podcast, actually. It was a documentary that I did with McCullough and Malone. And people have always asked me, hey, I'd like to see it. If you found it, well, on Twitter this morning, somebody posted it. So I thought we would do Instagram Live so people could watch it who's never seen it. And just for context, I'll tell you what's going on in the video. This was in July of 2021 when I had reviewed the patents for both Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, and Pfizer. And there was something that I noticed specific with the Pfizer patents, that there was two legal definitions. And believe it or not, this I didn't even realize this till I rewatched it this morning, that this gentleman who did the film, it's called COVID Revealed, it was done the day that the approval level came out for Pfizer. But since now we're 4 years after when this was filmed, I want you to hear really carefully what I said 4 years ago about SV40, about Pfizer, because I think a lot of people don't realize just how much diagnosis was going on. This was already after I had been going back into the hospital for about a year and a half to figure out truly what was going on with COVID. My next blog that'll probably come out, I think, either this weekend or Monday, will give you the definitive story of what I found when I went back to the ICUs. But right now, I think people will be very, very interested in this little movie. It's about an hour long. Hopefully my phone will last that long. But I'm going to show it to you right off my Twitter feed. Okay? So let me turn this around and we'll get started. The first part was with Malone, so you guys could probably go listen to that.
Part interview with Dr. Robert Malone. Don't miss part 3. We cover some very significant and important ground there. You're going to want to see it. Thanks for being here. I really like people who are unabashed. People who just tell it like it is, not that they're trying to do it for effect, it's just their nature to be forthright. And when you're dealing with really smart people like neurosurgeons, it even gets better, and that's exactly who Dr. Jack Kruse is, a neurosurgeon who's unabashed, who certainly has very clear and well-reasoned perspectives when it comes to COVID. So I'm excited to share this interview with you. Dr. Kruse, thanks so much for taking the time to have this conversation with me. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts around this subject. Let's start with your background, as far as your academic background and kind of how you got into doing what you do today.
When it all started out, I was actually a dentist. Got my degree at the University of Connecticut in School of Dental Medicine, then went into oral surgery down at LSU. Finished those programs, and then went back to medical school, got an MD, and then became a neurosurgeon. And in the course of that, what I like to say is unbelievable length of residency that I went through, because I was like a PGY 13. The place that I did my training in neurosurgery was an interesting place, especially for the topic that you're going to get involved with me today, because the first time I got in, I would say, I wouldn't even call it a vaccine debate. The first time I ever began to questioning, what I was taught throughout my training, actually came down because of what happened actually at the place I did my residency, which was Austrian Medical Foundation. And the biggest, medical mistake that ever occurred in the 20th century actually occurred partially at that hospital. Very few people know the story. The people that tend to know the story know it from a different aspect. They know it from, believe it or not, I guess we don't have to get into it, but it's a political story. And anyway, Alton Oster, who Austrian Medical Foundation was named after, was involved as an investor in Cutter Pharmaceuticals. And Cutter Pharmaceuticals was one of the 5 companies that was in charge of taking Salk's vaccine for polio back in the 40s, and then when it was introduced in 51. And at the time, I guess you would probably remember Watson and Crick didn't discover DNA until 1953. So many people don't know that the polio vaccine was created in a non-DNA, non-RNA kind of world. And the Salk vaccine was very difficult to grow. It was very difficult to manufacture, and it was a problem. So in many respects, it has the same problems that we're dealing with today with messenger RNA technology when we've really never used this before. But what happened back then, I actually was fortunate to operate with Dr. Alton Oster's son, John Oster. And he told me a story, I guess it was my 3rd year in neurosurgery residency, that kind of stunned me. He told me that his dad gathered the medical staff of the hospital together, and he wanted to, give some assurances that the vaccine was good. So he injected his granddaughter and grandchild in front of the medical staff, and his grandson died in a week, and his granddaughter came down with a mild case of polio from the injection. So when I heard this, I was like, whoa, because I was always told, the polio vaccine was like the greatest thing since sliced bread. And when he told me this, he actually mentioned to me, he said we should look up something called Cutter Pharmaceuticals and the Cutter Incident. So I did that, and I reviewed a lot of papers, and some of the people that you probably have already talked to will mention a guy named Paul Offit. And Paul Offit is a big researcher in the vaccine field. He wrote a really amazing paper about the Cutter Incident and what the problem is. But I went down the rabbit hole deeper because what Dr. John Oster told me, I wanted to find out a little bit more about what the mistakes were that were made and to see kind of what's happening in the future. And what I found out when I actually looked at the FDA and NIH websites, I found out right around that time that there was a gentleman that was running the NIH, and apparently everybody was fired very, very quickly at that time. And it turned out that the real problem with the vaccine that people didn't really know about is that it was so difficult to grow, they had to grow that monkey kidney virus. I should say monkey kidney cell medium. And what eventually happened is that the polio virus was co-infected with SV40. SV40 stands for simian virus 40. That also means that there was 39 other ones that were potentially in there, probably much more. Well, the time the NIH decided to bury that information from everybody else, and at the time, worldwide, there's already 350 million doses that had gone out. So I kind of wondered, what actually happened? And it turned out, that's when I found out about Bernice Eddy. Bernice Eddy was an MD PhD, much like I think some of the guys who've already interviewed, like Dr. Malone. And she got up at the New York Academy of Science meeting in I think it was 52 or 53, and she casually mentioned that the polio virus was co-infected with SV40 and that was out there. Well, the reason why the story got very interesting for me is because Dr. Oster, Alton Oster, he was the first head of the National Cancer Foundation. And he actually was appointed much later in his life by Nixon when he was pushing Nixon to start the war on cancer. And I always wondered what these two incidences link. And it turns out that we found out subsequently throughout my medical training, because here we are now 30 years later, we now know that SV40 causes a lot of different cancers. And one of the ones that is pretty rare, because I know it was rare when I was in medical school, but it's not rare for people today, is mesothelioma. And there was a really interesting paper that was written a long time ago where
Michael Carbone, for those of you paying attention,
in Bethesda, in DC, and it asked, the surgeon became kind of famous in
paper was in 1991, 92.
Every time you did a case of mesothelioma, you would take the tissue out and keep it.
The story
Like,
I'm
every
relaying to
single
you is from
mesothelioma
1998.
Every day. So the researcher, who's a PhD at the time, asked could he check each tumor for markers. And the surgeon, of course, chuckled at him because he didn't really know what he was looking at. And basically what the PhD researcher wanted to find out was mesothelioma one of the cancers associated with SV40? And it turned out every single surgical pathology specimen that he had from the surgeon, who had the world's largest case, was positive for SV40. So, of course, you can imagine that story was kind of buried. And when that happened, I can tell you, it was right around 1998, 99, because that's when I remember reading about it. And I thought to myself, God, this story started back in the beginning with FDR, the March of Dimes, his attorney. And it seems to me it was almost a comedy to errors, that it continued, and the mistakes didn't stop. And we have things in hospitals called sentinel events. And one of the things that you learn, being a clinician, about sentinel events, that they get to be sentinel events because more mistakes are made to try to cover the last mistake. And that's kind of exactly what happened with the polio vaccine. And to this day, I would tell you, I would venture to say any doctor that you probably interviewed below the age of 55 doesn't know about the currents. Like when I mention it on Twitter, they're kind of stunned. And I don't think that the younger doctors today realize why people who are against vaccination have a good reason to be a little skeptical. And then when you layer that story on to what happened in 2009 and 2010 with the pandemics drug that caused a whole bunch of adverse events, specifically narcolepsy. I mean, you have two incidents right there where people were harmed. So I came in to this, I would say, through the back door, probably because of where I trained and the people that I was around, because these were the people that were at the beginning of the polio virus vaccination, and then the big battle between salt and savory. And for people who don't remember, I would tell you, Alfred Sabin was a lot like I would say Dr. Robert Malone today. Sabin's oral polio vaccine really saved the day. Back when this thing was going on with the Cutter incident. And eventually the Salk vaccine went back after it was retooled later on, and they got things fixed. But the problem was, to this day, I don't believe the federal government has ever really come clean about truly what happened at that time. So I've always been a skeptic, and I'll be very clear with you here. It's not that I'm anti-vax, I'm just anti-this vax. And I'm anti-this vax, meaning the COVID vaccine, for one simple reason. I believe if you look at the way all vaccines have been manufactured, at least in my medical career, they've taken years. This one has taken about 6 months. And do I think that we know everything that we need to know? No, I think the yellow card data that's coming out of the UK, and I think the VAERS database, which are also showing unbelievable amounts of adverse events. This should be like a beacon or a signpost to clinicians and PhD researchers, but unfortunately, I have to tell you that I'm pretty disappointed with my profession because nobody's out there saying the things that I'm telling you.
Remember, this is 4 years ago.
I think we have a duty to be accurate when it comes to this because of the inaccuracies that have happened in the past. And do I believe that there's certain people out there that actually should take the COVID vaccine? Yeah, I think it's pretty clear. If you're over 70 years old and have a low vitamin D level, and you have multiple comorbidities, yeah, I think the risk benefit.
Obviously, that opinion has changed quite a bit now that we got more aftermarket data.
This new technology that is leaky. It's not really a tight vaccine. This opens us up to a lot of different abnormalities in this technology that unfortunately I've read because I've read some of Dr. Malone's initial work he was the one, that sounded the goal probably, I'd say, a year before I got really into this. And, I have a big following on the internet. You know how you and I connected. I came out on a TV program over a year ago that, you had to get on a subscription base. And basically I'm saying the same things that I'm telling you right now.
So remember, that's 5 years ago.
People need to ask very sensitive and specific questions.
That's actually when I went back to the ICUs to figure out what really was going on.
I think right now, so many things have been outsourced to consultants and to people that really shouldn't be involved in a medical decision-making platform, that I think people need to do a better job. And, I always say, when you know better, you do better. And right now, everything is opaque. And, here we are talking in August. Yesterday, the FDA, the Pfizer vaccine, and I will tell you, and I don't even know if you know this, I've had a chance to review the FDA letter, and I think it's really kind of funny that the Pfizer or the BioNTech vaccines, they're molecularly identical. One's got a different name, but do you know that the FDA approval is approved? They're two legally distinct vaccines.
See?
And when you start to understand why would the government would do this, it turns out this is not based on biologic science, it's actually political science.
There you go.
If you really want to know the truth, I think it's economic science. And it's the economic protection and indemnification of Pfizer. And I think the reason for this, if you clearly read the letter that the FDA wrote to Pfizer yesterday, it doesn't give full approval to Pfizer. But the media, and I'm sure all the people that will come out against your film, will say otherwise. But I challenge any attorney to go read that letter and not come up with this unusual set of circumstances that we have with this vaccine. And like I told you before about the Cutter vaccine, the one thing that I think
I was trying to warn everybody, SV40 was likely in it. So pay attention. You're getting a history lesson from me here.
I think it's incumbent upon you, as the educated person, to take something you fundamentally may not believe, examine it for yourself, and then decide, hey, how am I going to handle this with my patients? How am I going to handle this with the people that rely on me? Like people who I pack their parachute, I have to give them good information.
Well, and insanely, I love that metaphor because you're packing their parachute, right? And that's a really good metaphor because the consequences are serious if you get it wrong. And first of all, I'm really pleased you went through the whole history of the polio vaccine, which I'm very familiar with. The Sabin vaccine, the Salt vaccine, all the stuff that happened along the way. SV40, being a real problem, and this is all documented if you know where to look for it. But it's almost nobody knows about it, including most healthcare professionals aren't aware of it, as you said, except maybe over a certain age. But I believe the history is important because what does that have to do with today? It's because understanding our behavior around vaccines.
You can see this is before anybody knew that SV40 was in these.
And I think you've done a really.
And I was trying to warn this guy
that
I thought it was in there.
Because polio is always the thing from, well, what about your polio vaccine? As you said, it's considered one of the greatest miracles of the last century, etc. But no, there's a sordid past there that people aren't aware of. And I think there's a lot of pain and suffering that is in the wake of all that nobody really cares to talk about. And now we're dealing with huge dollars on the table. We're dealing with companies that are indemnified by the government because the private insurer will indemnify them. And yesterday, as you talked about, I'm halfway through the FDA letter about the Pfizer vaccine, and I'm only halfway through, and I'm sitting there saying, this isn't at all right. I mean, this seems like not a traditional approval letter, but it's sort of like a lot of weaseling around issues to justify why they are approving this thing now formally.
I asked an attorney, this morning when I jotted down my notes, I asked an attorney this question after reading the letter, especially on page 2 and also page 12, AA. Why would they do that? And the answer that I got was kind of interesting. He said, why would you specify identical versions of a product, but it'll be legally different? He said it was pretty simple. He said this was a very slick way legally to make sure they got the license so they can impose mandates for the government, because it appears that's what the federal government wants. But they need the EUA so that it can continue to evade liability that's there, and that's the real problem.
Well, that's interesting. So I haven't thought about from that liability perspective, but they still want to cite, the emergency use authorization, even though they have approval.
The reason why they want to do it, and this is the interesting thing that the lawyer didn't know, but I do know as a clinician. The one thing that's still on the market, the Pfizer vaccine is flooding the market. So realize that when the FDA gives somebody a license, it comes with liability for the manufacturer. Turns out that the EUA all were given liability shields. So if you go back and read all of Pfizer's contracts that they've done with the government, it is blatantly obvious that the lawyers at Pfizer have actually told the government, if you want us to play ball with you, these are the rules that we're giving you. And I thought it was really interesting, because remember.
So I'm just going to pause it for this minute. I'm trying to make the case here for this gentleman, but he didn't really get it. And I'll give you the history lesson. I'm actively back in the hospitals collecting vials, which you'll hear me talk about, to send it, to make sure that SV40 is not in the original EUA. Why? Because what I was worried about, there was two versions of the vaccine. One they showed the FDA and the other one that they planned on giving to you guys. And this is exactly what this warning was 4 years ago.
The letter from the FDA to Pfizer, it's not the other way around. Pfizer didn't write this, but in effect, it kind of did, because what they basically got from the federal government is now telling us, we the people, that they would prefer us be without recourse if we're injured, rather than Pfizer having to defend its product in court. And it goes even further than that. I would tell you that both the Trump and the Biden administration want us to think, we the people, that the vaccine we are receiving is the licensed one.
There you
that
go.
everybody's talking about in mainstream media, which
4 years ago, people.
To the mandates, because now they think it can be mandated, but instead you're almost certain to receive EUA vials.
Which is going to have the SV40 in it.
This is being done to say Pfizer's behind it. I guess the reason I'm telling you this, because I think I've kind of figured out the key to this mystery, especially for your documentary, is to probably find out the vials. Because remember, the lot numbers will be tied to who's got EUA and who doesn't. And it turns
Listen to what I'm saying.
Most of the stuff that's out there right now that are in the fridges of our hospitals is all the stuff where they can evade liability, but they can push mandates. And I think this is the reason why, right now in August in the United States, that you are seeing a massive push.
This is 2021.
At propaganda level. I'm talking about legalized marketing, which is legalized lying. That everybody needs to get, vaccinated and get a booster. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. But when you actually read the FDA letter, boy, this begins to make a ton of sense. When you understand it from the legal side, not so much from the biologic side. This really, like I said to you before, this is an era. This vaccine for me is really based on political science, not biological science. And now I'm beginning to believe that the political science behind it really has an economic basis.
Well, how could it not at this point? Looking at the money that's on the table, and how, because and think about it. This isn't sold kind of in the free market. This is something that's sold to governments, right, in large tranches. But you've made an extraordinary observation here. I want to dissect a little bit. So, are you saying that based on the approval letter, because the emergency use authorization product and now the licensed product are identical, right? They're the same product.
Right.
But there's probably some law saying that.
Now, here's the mistake that he made. He said that they're identical. They're identical legally. We didn't know they were identical biologically, and I had a clue that they weren't, which is why I was collecting these vials to send them to Kevin McKiernan.
That anything that was manufactured prior to approval does not qualify, which is why they try to weasel these two things together in the approval letter. So basically, people are still getting the emergency use product, even though they're saying, now this is authorized.
And just so you know, that was the product that was laced with SV40.
So,
Absolutely. This is the reason why I think to parse this out. And this is where I think it gets to be.
And you have to remember, I was being very careful what I said here. The reason why is because I didn't have any proof at this time that my inclination was correct about this. Who gave me that proof was Kevin McKiernan and Philip Buchholz.
To be really interesting. When you realize that it's political science and economic science, then the real question has to be for the person that's going to watch your documentary. I can tell you where I am. I can't tell you how to think. I think good teachers teach you, what they know. They show you the path, but ultimately it's up to you. I'm going to give you a very quick rundown of how I see this going. So you're going to be looking through my glasses now over the next 12 to 18 months. Mm-hmm. I think the COVID pandemic was really brought in for the vaccine and for a lot of things that the World Economic Forum stand for. I think the vaccine was brought in initially for the vaccine passport, which is tied to a mandate. I think the vaccine passport / mandate was brought in for future biometric IDs. I think the biometric ID will be brought in for...
I remember what you just heard from Christy Nome, right? With Real ID? Remember, this is 4 years ago, people.
For the central bank and a digital currency. And I think ultimately the CBDC, which is the central bank digital coin, was brought in to enslave us in a type of slavery that is very different than the one that we know in America.
Now that part of the story looks like Trump has stopped because he stopped the CBDC and he's pushed the Bitcoin narrative. So that part at least has been attacked. But listen to what else I say 4 years ago.
This one will be an economic war. And I have to tell you, it's not lost on me that we're having this discussion. We just saw, our president and his administration leave Afghanistan the way we did Saigon. And I thought to myself, these people are enslaved. And I think we're going to be enslaved the same way. And, I do have to tell you the story because I'm sure you do know it, but if you don't, it may be illuminatory with what I just said to you. Because I don't want people to think this is hyperbole. Back when we had the founding fathers doing the Constitution, there's this very famous doctor named Benjamin Rush. Most people know about him because of Rush Medical School in Chicago. But what most doctors don't know and what most researchers don't know is that he lobbied hard before the Constitution was made. You can read about this in the Federalist Papers, that he wanted Thomas Jefferson to put an amendment to the Constitution about medical tyranny. And the only reason it wasn't put in by Thomas Jefferson is because he couldn't envision a time or a place where something like this could be used. And here, you and I are sitting on a Zoom call. You're making a movie in probably faster record time than they made the vaccine. To get this story out, I have to tell you, every time I think about what we're living through in this year, I think about how prescient and how smart Benjamin Rush really was. And generally I have reverence for Thomas Jefferson, but I have to tell you, this may go down as one of the biggest political mistakes made in American history, especially when you consider how it appears the government and the World Economic Forum have formed this bond in Davos.
And just so you guys know, Klaus Shaw was just indicted on corruption charges. So tell me I wasn't telling you the truth back then.
It's been going on for 50 years. We just ended the gold standard 50-year reunion that happened in 71, again with Nixon. And I can't help but think that this link is there. And I think this is the reason why, when you read the Pfizer FDA letter, it all comes back to legalese, it all comes back to economics, it all comes back to finance. And that should never be between me and my patient. That should never be between a researcher doing work on this. And that's part of the reason why I've developed a reverence for some of the I guess some of the scientists that you probably will interview here. It's also the reason why I have a disdain for people like Fauci, for people like Sanjay Gupta on CNN. And he's a neurosurgeon like I am. I think the one that I really have a real problem with is Laura Wen, who is an MD researcher. She's an ER doctor who basically is a media head on CNN that basically parrots whatever the CDC and FDA want her to parrot. And the problem is, I think as physicians, we're supposed to teach the public, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I hope when people watch this, they heard me clearly. I'm going to say it again. I'm not anti-vax. I'm anti-this vax. Why? Because there's many things that have occurred in our current events that make me think about the story that John Oshner told me about his dad.
There you go.
And
Linking into
what happened to Bernie
SV40.
Sanders-
Trying to warn
What
you.
happened to Bernie Sanders is likely what's going to happen to Robert Malone. He probably cost himself the Nobel Prize. Because he's speaking out against his own technology. And I would venture to say that most of the people that watch this film probably don't even know who Bernie Sanders is. And I have to tell you, do you know anything about her history? She was a brilliant MD, PhD researcher. I mean, I feel like when we lose people like Bernie Sanders or Robert Malone because of a viral tyranny, I feel much like the Library of Alexandria is burned. We're losing unbelievable amounts of data. And for those of you who know history well, what happened when we lost the Library of Alexandria? That's where the Dark Ages came from. It took us to get to the Renaissance to get through it. And for those of you who really don't know, that's about 500 to 700 years of history. I think the same kind of things could be going on. I actually look at what we're facing right now with mainstream media and the paradigm as they are burning down the Library of Alexandria, and nobody seems to realize it.
That's what they're doing with AI.
You have, and because
That's why you got to push against
know
AI.
you and know me, they connect with us. You and I didn't know each other from a hole in the wall prior to doing this, and I want you to know, and I want your audience to know, I care about people. I don't care whether you take the vaccine or not, but I do care that you make the right decision for you and the right decision for your family, and that you understand if you did take the vaccine, what likely things do you need to pay attention to? I mean, I'll give you a perfect example because I don't know if you know this. Robert Malone took the vaccine, but he took it for what I consider a pretty poor reason, so he could travel. And the problem is he wound up getting long COVID from it. And he always tells people the reason he waited a long time is to see if you get a signal in the aftermarket data for antibody-dependent enhancement. And
We're way past that now, bro.
I think we have that information now. I think it's clear. I think it's there. It mimics what we found in the coronavirus vaccines that we use for other animals. So what should the pivot have been in the CDC and the FDA, in my opinion? I think that we should have tried to solve this problem with therapeutics that have effects against.
So what was I talking about right there? I was talking about the use of methylene blue and actually hydroxychloroquine, which, if you followed the story with me over 5 years, the reason I didn't get into the problems that Mary Talley Bowden did, she pushed ivermectin and a lot of the immunoglobulins. They took the immunoglobulins away from her. So she pushed ivermectin, then they went after her and her medical license. But nobody knew that hydroxychloroquine was active. And I told people that Fauci had written a paper in 2005 that showed that hydroxychloroquine was effective against all coronaviruses. So there's a reason I knew that. The next blog is going to tell you exactly the reason why, because it's tied to hemoglobin. And the funny part of the story is most people didn't know that hydroxychloroquine is derived from methylene blue.
Against, COVID and COVID variants.
That's why I didn't have the problems
on
Mary did.
To fight it. And we're fortunate right now because all of the data from all of the vaccines was done on the alpha and beta variant. Those are the first two that out. The delta variant is a new one. It's a point of contention now between I guess what we call the anti-vax and the vax community, where that variant came from, but I think every day the warnings that Dr. Malone gave us 12 to 18 months ago is now bearing fruit. And we see it in Israel, we see it in Iceland, we're even seeing it in
The vaccinated create variants. It's not a podcast. This is a movie I did. That's why I'm putting it on here. I didn't have access to it. Pay attention.
These vaccines to the Delta variant. Then the question is, when we start to give people booster shots, what's the next variant coronavirus that we're doing? Because, you know, ultimately, the story is we're trying to protect grandma and grandpa. Well, guess what? If this continues much further, grandma and grandpa won't have any vaccine to rely on. And guess what? They are the true target market. I mean, it's pretty clear, you know, 12 to 18 months after me looking into this, that there's a 230% risk of death in that old age group.
They're tapering the Ponzi scheme.
So that's the reason why the risk.
I just told you the first time 4 years ago.
I'm talking about with mask mandates and also with this approval and with boosters. I don't believe that the people in charge truly understand what's going on. Just as they didn't understand what it meant to give 350 million people SV40 in the world.
I'm warning you.
And we can still see, that's 70 years ago, they still haven't cleaned up that mess. You know, it's been my belief the whole time I've been a doctor that that SV40 nightmare has a lot to do with why Nixon and Oster got together in 1971 and opened the war on cancer. Why? Because I think they felt badly that they were involved with it in the beginning. And I think the collateral effects from the decisions that are being made today, I've got a funny feeling they may be with us for 70, 80, 90 years.
There you go. I was warning you.
The big picture is breathtaking because very many people are seeing pieces of this and reporting on it, but it's really hard to have the proper context unless you see the big picture and you understand, as you said, you know, the political aspects of it, the economic aspects of it, and then, you know, the health sciences and biological aspects of it. This thing isn't just an issue of science. It obviously is not. And of course, we're looking at really chilling ironies, as you said. The behaviors of what's going on right now is actually taking the people we're supposed to be protecting, like the elderly populations, and putting them at great peril and great risk more than anybody else. And we've got Nobel laureates, like the one French Nobel laureate who his affidavit that he filed saying
Luc
that
Montagnier.
against humanity. What's going on?
Some of the parts of the story that I don't believe that people spent a lot of time thinking about, because everybody's had a myopic focus on the biologic aspects, because that's actually where the government wants us to be. This story really began in 1971. When Nixon was the president, he got us off the gold standard. That's where we created fiat money, which is paper money not backed by anything. But Kissinger was the Secretary of State and became very influential in 2 presidencies up to 77. His best friend at the time was Klaus Schwab, who at the same time, in 1973, started the World Economic Forum. If you know anything about Nixon, what politically is he probably best known for? I'm not talking about Watergate. I'm actually talking about what?
China.
Exactly, open China. And he knew that he had to open the borders to China to transfer industrialization to China because Kissinger and Nixon decided to put the global elite in charge. And the way to do that is to use some of the ideas around...
It's a movie called Color Revealed from 4 years ago.
And Klaus Schwab's data. Now, back in 73 through about 80, nobody in the United States really knew much about Klaus Schwab, but everybody knew about Kissinger. Kissinger carried the water for the World Economic Forum in government. So people always ask me, how did Schwab get to have a big influence? It wasn't Schwab, it was his buddy Kissinger. And Kissinger then became a lobbyist from 77 on. And you know, people still to this day don't realize Kissinger's the only person from Nixon's cabinet who's still alive.
He's alive at this time in 2021. He's dead now.
Impact on progressive leftist policies in the country. And it's grown. I mean, I've seen this. I'm fortunate enough to be old enough to know these links. And what I've seen is that the goal of both Kissinger and Schwab, where it was a one world government where you would own nothing and be happy about it. And if you understand how to pull this off politically, the best way to do it is going back to that story that I told you about Jefferson and Benjamin Rush. It's really hard to do it if you don't have a medical tragedy. And if you go back and read Klaus Schwab's books, like where he began to get important was when Kissinger stepped away to be a lobbyist. That's when Davos became a big deal. And Davos is always covered by CNBC and Fox Business News. It's not covered, in the Wall Street, I should say the
New England Journal of
New England Journal of Medicine, or many journals there. Most doctors don't even know that these guys are tied to it. And I like to bring out to people that the World Economic Forum began in 1986, where they basically took over Harvard University, especially a guy named Walter Willett, to try to push a plant-based diet, to get us to stop eating animals. They even did something by poisoning all the peer-reviewed journals, something called Eat Lancet, which has pushed this.
I remember who owns that. The
years.
Maxwell family, Ghislaine Maxwell.
Side, they're the group behind the ESG narrative. The ESG narrative is where you get the climate change thing. The whole goal
COVID revealed.
of these global elites is socialism. That's where it comes down. And socialism is an authoritarian reality. Well, that's exactly what we have now with COVID. You're going to take the jab, and you're going to like it, and that's the way it's going to be. And we're going to pass through as much science. We're going to use our scientists because Bill Gates found out that you can be successful with Microsoft buying off politicians, but you can be really successful when you buy off scientists. And how did he learn that message? He learned that message because most people don't know that Bill Gates' dad was a lobbyist in Washington, D.C. for over 30 years, and guess what?
He also worked for the
He
CIA.
told his son in the 80s, he said the best gig you can ever get is to get involved in vaccines because Reagan's going to pass this law where there's no liability. He goes, you always have liability on the software side when you're selling computers. How would you like to get into something that's got huge margins and no legal liability? And guess what? Magically, he quit, started Gavi, and what did he start to do? He started to get guys like Fauci. He started to get the Melinda Gates Foundation. If you look,
Peter Daszak from EcoHealth Alliance.
CEO to begin to get all these different CEOs around to say, hey, look, this is the world we're going to build. You're the top 1%. We're going to meet in Davos. They got so bold that about 10 years ago, Klaus Schwab just started printing books and telling everybody, this is what we're going to do. And guess what? I'll be damned, but this is exactly what we're going to do. And I think
that's what they
the
did.
thing that should scare people is not only are you giving away your medical sovereignty with this, but I think the bigger issue is that you're giving away your economic sovereignty. And what does that mean? That means that they want you to be wholly dependent on government. So what am I saying to you? We're basically...
So the point I want to make to you when you hear this, because obviously this guy was not really interested in me talking about the economic side, but now that we're 4 years after this video or film is done, I want to say this to you all clearly. Everybody knows what inflation is in money, and it's an unlegislated tax where they take value away from you. What is the COVID vaccine? What did I always believe the COVID vaccine was? It was an inflation tax on your health so that they would subtract your health from you if you complied with what they wanted to do. Now, how did they do that? You're going to hear the details of that, I promise. All the things that I found out in the 4.5 years that I went back to the hospitals, precisely and exactly how they did it, okay? So when I did this video, you're going to hear towards the end where and what I'm getting ready to do. I had already been in the hospital for a year, had already collected the vials that I needed to collect to get the proof. I didn't have the proof yet. This is before any of the sequencing was done. But listen to what I say at the end, because I had a very good inkling about where everything was headed.
Really going to have the next 50 to 100 years in the United States if this doesn't meet the public and doesn't outrage the public like it is in France and Belgium right now. We're basically going to be China or Cuba except with food. That's it. And are they going to debase and devalue our currency to control us? Are they going to control our movements? Yes. This isn't just about a virus. I actually tell people that I believe COVID is a compliance test for an economic reset. And I will tell you, now that the military's pulled out of Afghanistan, now they can point their guns really at their true target.
Listen to what I
The
said.
American taxpayer.
There you go.
Well, this is obviously extraordinary observations, and it could be even construed as inflammatory in nature, but it bears out. I mean, if you take the time to look beneath the surface of all of what's implicated now, censorship not only being tolerated but being applauded. People liking the censorship, the interaction between the Silicon Valley platforms and the mainstream media, the government, and the pharmaceutical industry. And as you said, imagine having a product with high margins and no liability, and having forced the government to force people to consume the product, which is another level of that, right? And then you put these things together, and
You'll find out why RFK can't do anything.
I think Jefferson, to go back to your point earlier, probably said, well, wait a minute, we're covered with our unalienable rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. That's already, so that implies medical sovereignty, one would imagine.
The problem is, Benjamin Rush was brilliant. He actually saw that a medical catastrophe would be used as an emergency, and any time a government has an emergency, it gives them a right to usurp power from the taxpayer. And that's effectively what's been going on for the last 50 years. I tell people this all the time, and this is the reason why I want to draw you back to this story. Basically, the day that Nixon went off the gold standard was basically they made counterfeiting legal, okay? In terms of your store value of your assets. What they're doing right now is exactly the same thing. They
COVID, they're stealing your time.
Viral or medical tyranny
Yep.
to control you, but ultimately, they're using this as a stepping stone to take the power back of what their real target is. And I would tell anybody who's interested about the COVID story, you have 2 years. Put the other year and keep listening what Janet Yellen and Powell keep saying about the central bank digital coin, and you'll actually start to notice that the drumbeat is getting louder and louder and louder. And guess what? You might think that Schwab and Kissinger were brilliant to use this medical travesty to destroy an economy, to give them pause at the end of the debt cycle where we're at now. The last debt cycle we had fought World War II. Right now, they're trying to end it a totally different way without getting people to revolt. And I'm hoping
Tapering the Ponzi scheme.
And they begin to go, man, this story is a whole lot bigger than just the vaccine. This story is really about our sovereignty in a variety of different ways being usurped from us, and we need to think about this collectively. And I always tell people, if you can't question science, it's propaganda. Who taught us that? Joseph Goebbels at Nuremberg.
Wow.
That's exactly what he said. And that's how they got the German people to go along. It's not that the German people were bad then, they just had no idea what propaganda was, what legalized lying is. It's marketing. That's what Big Pharma is excellent at doing. And, they're not going to stop. And when they find out that the government's complicit, and when you realize that everybody on mainstream media, there's 5 corporations that control them, and the number one way that Sanjay Gupta and Dr. Wen are paid is with the dollars that Pfizer just made on you. I mean, last quarter, Moderna made $6
It's not a
billion,
podcast, it's a
Pfizer
movie
made
I did 4 years
$18.7 billion
ago.
on the jab. So I got news for you. If you don't think this is one of the best pipelines that Big Pharma has ever found, and all they're doing is using that money from the government, and what is the government doing? They're printing money at record rates from the taxpayer. They're actually stealing from the taxpayer to make the plan go. If you don't think this is not a brilliant plan, then you're asleep at the wheel. Because
4 years ago, I told you all.
Outstanding, and it's about time.
And now you found out about USAID, how they're doing it.
Dr. Malone, anybody who's willing to put the target on their back to educate the sleeping. I'm actually almost past that point, to be honest with you. I'm not interested in waking up the sleep anymore. I'm interested in waking up the other lions.
Savages.
Hopefully when you make this movie,
Not too many people
watch
that
it
are
get
savages
mad
on
as hell.
Instagram.
And they go, wait a minute. We've been sold the bill of goods, and not only does it go past the biologics, there's actually a bigger story here.
Correct.
And it just goes to show you how carefree the government really is. We're looked at as, acceptable collateral damage. The same way
Tapering the Ponzi.
a general will look at taking a hill in Iwo Jima. We show great pictures and war pictures, how wonderful that is. But if you really think about it, it's kind of ridiculous. And are they doing the same thing with these messenger RNA technologies? Will there be people harmed by this?
Yep.
And will the harm be blatantly obvious? No. I mean, we already know VAERS in the yellow card, the ADE stuff, none of that. It's tenfold underreported. So if that's the case, then our last hope is for people like you, taxpayers, to put your money out.
There you go.
Go find scientists.
Listen to what I said.
That aren't afraid of getting the arrows.
Remember, this is pre-RFK, pre-fucking Nicole.
The reason I respect Malone so much.
Listen to what I say.
This guy should win a Nobel Prize for what he's discovered. And he realizes that his technology has been utilized in a plan to harm a lot of people. And is he taking it lying down? No, he's fighting a tooth and nail. He's using his intellect to teach people what to do. And I happen to respect a guy like that takes his Hippocratic oath very seriously. I happen to take it very seriously, and I do my part. I say the things I say. I've connected dots. I think if you think that this story is just about a vaccine passport, I have to tell you something. I think you missed the boat.
Yeah, well, and let me get into this because for yourself personally, and this is what's been in the back of my mind.
Listen.
Looking at the
Let's just show you how long ago it was.
Developing your career, both academically and then professionally and clinically. You saying the types of things you're saying right now has to come at great personal peril and personal risk. So what has this been like for you to be saying the things you're saying? And do you feel like your license might come under threat or other threats that might come at you?
Yeah, I do, but I will tell you, and you'll probably understand why we had to do this video very quickly. I told you I'm headed to another country.
Ooh.
And Jack has been
4 years ago
going to other countries to look for the escape route. In other words, another place that's going to be safer to pack my parachute medically in the future. And I will tell you, the place that I'm headed tomorrow with specifics is El Salvador. And I'm going to El Salvador.
That's why this movie had to be done
They
rushed.
did something probably in the last month that is really good for people like me. I told you that I believe in medical and financial sovereignty. Now, they made Bitcoin legal tender. So where am I looking? I'm looking to leave my own country. And I'm going in different places to see where they won't mandate a vaccine passport for me to travel. See, unlike Dr. Malone, I have to tell you I'm a little bit more crafty than him because he's focused in on the biologic side. I'm looking at the greater 30,000-foot view.
I was trying to warn all of you.
When you participate in Bitcoin, which is an anti-central bank digital token, it's an anti-treasury device.
It's an anti-geoengineering device.
It's an anti-CDC,
Anti-Klaus Schwab.
anti-Fauci,
Yep.
anything that you could think about. It provides complete self-sovereignty so that anybody who puts a mandate on me, I can do whatever I want.
Go fuck
And that's
themselves.
The key is to build
And still doing it.
self-sovereignty, you have to understand
4 years
how
after this
far you
video.
have to take it. Medically, what I would tell people in the United States, and this may be tough for people to hear, maybe even tough for you.
Listen.
Most of the people in the United States are now subject to centralized medicine. What does that mean? It's the same thing as the central bank. You are controlled by the people who control your doctors. All the doctors on Twitter have blue checks. They are employees for somebody else. Whatever the employer says, the doctor has to do. Otherwise, they face getting fired or deplatformed. Oh, what have I been building in my practice for 15 years? Something called decentralized medicine. Meaning,
Yep, I did.
if you were my patient and you came to see me, no one gets between you and I. In other words, I'll tell you what I think the data says, I'll tell you what I think it needs, and we'll develop a game plan together that not only covers your financial risks, your medical risks, but also your political risks. Because I will tell you, I've often said that zip code will trump your genetic code, and people laughed at me 15 years ago when I said it. And I would tell you right now, if you live in California, Illinois, or New York versus Florida, tell me I'm wrong.
True.
Especially with respect to COVID.
Remember, guys, this is 4 years ago.
Right now, here we are in August 2021.
There you go.
People still don't get this idea. But I have to tell you, people that follow me, they've been hearing this for 10 years. Now, did I think the dominoes were going to fall the way in which they've fallen in 2019, 2020, 2021? No, I didn't. But do I now see through my glasses differently than maybe a lot of the other people that you interviewed, and maybe even you? I want you to see something that you may not see. See, I always tell people that the smartest people out there, they're able to see the future before the future happens.
Right.
And everything that's happening to us today foretells a big problem is coming in the United States. We are headed for abject government collapse, and it's going to start on the economic side. If you understand when you have...
That's exactly what's going on now. That's why Trump's got to do the tariffs.
How is that going to happen? How
He's got to refinance $27 trillion of debt.
You know, this is what I usually...
Most of you are fucking watching Netflix and drinking coffee.
Called the end of debt cycles. And when you begin to understand that the government's dance for the last 50 years has been, how can we end this debt cycle and not cause a war? And I have to tell you, medical tyranny is top of that list. They're pulling off absolutely amazing stuff right now because, unlike my generation, the boomer generation, young people are very compliant. They're perfectly happy as long as you give them Starbucks and Netflix and a video game to play on. They don't really question what's going on. And I think the people that are in my generation, I saw my grandfather, I saw my father fight in World War I and World War II. They died for these freedoms that I feel like every day I get up, I want to know what freedom have we given up today.
You're watching the full movie right now, girlfriend.
This goes back to
So when this goes live, you can rewatch it.
What happens when you wake up in a world and you're 60 years old and you look to your left and look to your right and the world has completely changed? Nobody seems to think questioning the media, the government, or your politicians or the central bank or the FDA or the CDC is a wise thing to do. No, let's just comply. How did that work? With Hitler. He tried to get people to comply. How did that go? And it amazes me how many people out there right now are making the same mistake Thomas Jefferson made and Benjamin Rush.
You got it. Go look at how many people voted for Kamala and Biden. That should tell you how many fucking idiots are out there.
When you truly do understand COVID, then I'm going to tell you, I want you to read books about Martin Luther King and Gandhi. Civil disobedience is what mandates should get. People should say no. Remember,
they should say fuck you, to be honest with
you.
you.
Their people, not the other way around.
Right.
And we make them afraid when we go to vote. And the thing is, we need to realize these need to be single issue voting things. You can't bring all the other things into it. When you are at economic war with your government, you have a duty to yourself to do the right thing. And if COVID is your issue, this vaccine's your issue, then I want to see you out doing what the French are doing, doing what the Belgians are doing. I don't want you sitting in...
That's when Marie Le Pen was...
Ben & Jerry's ice cream saying, hey, it's okay to be a vegan because Eat Plants, it tells me that way, and Klaus Schwab's behind it. That doesn't sit well with me.
That's one of my questions, because I know about the demonstrations going on in France, and that there's a resistance there that, of course, the media...
I remember now they've tried to put Marie Le Pen in jail 4 years later.
But my question is, why do you think it's happening there?
Listen to what I say. This guy...
That's simple. You just have to be an aficionado of history. How did we get the Statue of Liberty, my friend? French Revolution. Who supported the American Revolution? The French. Look, the French are really... I always make fun of them. The French are easy to make fun of politically because they usually don't stand up for anything, but usually when they get pissed off, their revolutions are pretty ass big.
Yeah.
They cut people's heads off. They take...
That's what we need to be doing.
And the thing is, if you mess with French cooking, French cheese, French wine, or it sounds like French medical sovereignty, you've crossed the line.
Yeah.
And you know what? I don't know. I think American culture is insulated from that part of France. And do I think we need to see that? I do. I don't know what the line in the sand is going to be for people in America to see. I personally hope that Dr. Malone is wrong and that the booster shots don't create ADE and we create a variant of COVID that actually kills. It's a killer virus. Right now, this is not a killer virus. The IFR on this is
Turned out the vaccine was.
the only change to Delta is, it's about 5 to 8 times more effective, but it's not a virus that's going to do a lot of people.
That is absolutely
But we don't
true.
know if the
Bitcoin
next
is the
variant's
guillotine we
gonna
all
be
need.
different. And it turns
Sadly,
out,
too many people don't realize
media
that.
wants to slant it, just like Fauci and the CDC, that, hey, it's the unvaccinated that are causing this. Anybody who's a scientist that reads a field virology book knows that ADE happens in people who are vaccinated.
That's right. It's the vaccinated that are the problem, not the
This is the
unvaxxed.
kind of basic information. Who packs your parachute? Do you trust the guys with the blue checks that practice in a centralized medical situation, or guys like me where I don't take your insurance? You want to come see me? You're going to have to pay me money. But I can promise you, as frank as I'm being with you right now, that's about as frank as I am with my patients. I like everything on fire.
My
I
mouth
make
is
sure
not a
that I go
bakery.
deeper
I tell you
than
the
most
fucking
people wanna
truth.
know.
Yeah, well, this is, I think probably going back to the big picture and prognosticating, as you said, I think the most brilliant people are the ones who, can look into the future, maybe deep into the future and see what's going to happen. You brought up Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged, which my intellectual mentor was Nathaniel Branden, who was her intellectual heir. So I literally just reread Atlas Shrugged, my 11th journey through it recently, just for context. And that book was published in 1957, and basically, in many ways, is a work of nonfiction at this point, as far as how things are unfolding. It's become reality, and this stuff.
If you read it 11 times, she got the idea. She lived through the Bolshevik Revolution. Well, guess what? That's kind of the same kind of revolution that we're going through right now, basically.
Exactly.
60 million people dead, Christians, Muslims killed.
Are being brought to our shores, and the problem is, people are so asleep now because we live in a technocracy that they're just worried about what's on Netflix, worried that they can see football, and A-OK that they can eat McDonald's. It's amazing to me, you see people on social media will be vaccinated and scream at unvaccinated people that they're terrible and this and that. Well, why isn't it that those people before COVID didn't go slap Big Macs and Coca-Colas out of people's mouths because that was a problem?
They're so full of contradictions. We could spend hours, pointing them out. But let's just say that there's a huge contradiction in the people who are asserting such things, such as this moral judgments that they're placing. But we take a look at their past behaviors. They're living in glass houses. Let me ask you maybe this question, maybe as a summary, kind of a final question on the personal side. So, for all the reasons you described, you're looking to get out of the country and find a safe haven. Do you have a concern that you'll never be able to come back?
Probably my number one concern now is, will I take the jab? Because I think that could happen, but I'm going to be honest with you. The 4th, 6th, probably 14th Amendment are on my side. The construction of the court, the way it stands now, right now I'm optimistic, not wildly, but optimistic. Do I think what we really need from your documentary is enough people to get pissed off to say there's lawyers out there that are willing to take this as a class action suit, make it a Supreme Court case, and actually create a law that says you cannot force anybody to get vaccinated. Not only that.
Just so you know, 2 weeks after this, I wrote my constitutional amendment for Bukele.
That also needs to be fought. Because right now, people economically are being forced to do this because they're being told, if you're not vaccinated by September 15th, look, the government just tried to do this with the military. There's tons of corporations out there that are doing this right now to their employees. If that's the reason I said to you earlier, if you don't think that this is an economic war, you are asleep at the wheel. They are going to force what they want. And do I think that
And they're still doing it.
as Dr. Malone said, that you may have to take a jab to travel back to the United States? I think in the current regime of things.
Listen to what I say.
Very likely. But I have a good feeling by 2024, that may not be the case.
Oh,
Yeah.
look at
What
that.
am I doing right now? I'm visiting countries that are doing things to help my self-sovereignty, because I understand the way to help my self-sovereignty the best is to make sure that I have enough economic freedom to basically put my middle finger up on my government when they try to perform medical tyranny or viral tyranny on me. So that's my plan of attack. My plan of attack, I can tell you, probably decidedly different than anybody else who did it.
Yeah,
True.
well, but it comes from a wider context, which informs what your plan of attack should be. And I appreciate your courage in sharing all of that here, and the fact that you kind of brushed this in before you're departing. But I can't tell you how important this interview was for this particular series, and for people to understand the bigger picture, because you lost the forest for the trees when you start to say, well, what's the risk of the vaccine versus what's not the risk of the vaccine. It's an issue, but there's a much greater issue at hand, and you uniquely have this extraordinary ability to organize it all and to be able to present it in a very tangible way. So I just can't tell you how much I not only thank you for taking the time with us, but also just thank you for having the courage to take a stand on all these issues and to speak publicly about it, because as you cited for Dr. Malone, it probably did cost him the Nobel Prize. And for yourself, again, this is something that can really have an adverse effect on your career. But nonetheless, the truth is important, and I'm glad that you're taking a stand on it.
Okay, so we'll talk a little bit, because I'm going to show you, so this is my house in El Salvador. So I always tell people it's the circadian house. It was named by the architect Our House for the hour of the day. But let me show you, based on the story that you just heard, what's in this house. This is a house based on kind of that documentary that I did. So let's go and see who the first thing you see when you walk in the house. That is David. If any of you know my story, you probably know why that's the first picture. That picture is a picture that my nurse bought me. Why? That's a gunshot wound. You probably watched the Danny Jones podcast. You may know why that's important. Then you just heard this one. This is a picture of the French Revolution. There's Marie Antoinette. So you see that. Then we come to that revolution, where we get the Statue of Liberty. Then we come to the next revolution, which is El Salvador, where a country that's built on Mayan culture, which you can see all throughout here with the jaguars, and then you see right in the middle the story there. When you walk down the hallway, you start to see different things on the wall. You can see my past in New Orleans. You see a little bit more. Okay? But then you come to this one from my clinic. What is this a story of? Why did I buy this huge painting? A lot of people have heard the story about this painting. See how it's got a little blue and a lot of red? That's AM sunlight. That's the reason why that picture exists. The golden rhino. Why? Because he's the most grounded mammal. Okay? And then let me show you this. This is the El Salvador Freedom Wall. I got to close it, though, to show it to you first. So hold on. You can see that's my piece of artwork for my members to tell them they need to jump without wings. Now, let me show you this. Give you a view. That was made 6 months after that movie you heard me do, because it gives you freedom. So if you're going to wear sunglasses, you make sure they're Bitcoin. Got it? Because you can't have inflation stealing your time away, and you're going to have to jump without wings. And how do you fight COVID? You do it right here. Right there. That's it. Outside. Totally outside in nature. No walls, no nothing. That's how you do it. So I just want you to understand that the story of that video that I did 4 years ago was literally while the vials were headed to Kevin McKiernan. And I had figured out exactly what the gain of function research did, that it was affecting the 1 beta chain on hemoglobin. And the next blog is going to tell you exactly how they tapered the Ponzi scheme. Every single detail that I found in my 4 years of going back and getting my ass kicked and sacrificing myself to find the story out. Okay? That's why this is important. So when this gets put on Instagram, you have a duty if you're savage to share it everywhere. So with that is the end of the story. So today, for the savages that are out there, everybody keeps asking me about Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, ligament laxity, problems with blood vessels, POTS, dysautonomia, dysbiosis. So I'm going to show you a quick video. I'm going to post that on Instagram, and then I'm going to give you the answer why all this stuff's happening from the decentralized medicine perspective. Okay, folks? So be ready for the lesson. If you like it, you share it. Here it comes. Pay attention. This is from April 25th. I'm not sure when Mary posted. Mary posted this one on September 11, 2024. So a while ago. But listen to what she says.
The COVID vaccine injuries that I've seen is a pattern of symptoms, and unfortunately, there's not a lot of good tests that we have, and that's part of the problem. So these patients will go to each other doctors, usually multiple, look at the $1 million workup, nothing really shows up, so they're prescribed antidepressants, anti-anxiety medicine, sleeping pills. I once saw a patient on all 3 of those medications. It's like unexplained rashes, serious, severe pain, fatigue, something called POTS, where your blood pressure goes up and down erratically with no real reason, neurological, tinnitus, with ringing in the ears, Bell's palsy. I don't see the strokes and the myocarditis because I'm outpatient, but I've certainly talked to many people that have family members that went through that.
Okay, so most of you know that I do see all those people. When I went back into the hospitals, I really saw it. But what you need to know to understand all of these diseases, we're talking about people with porphyrias, we're talking about people with EDS, POTS, MCAS, all these weird diseases that, all these influencers try to tell you, if you take their fucking supplement, it's going to work. Well, it's not going to. Why? Because all of them are tied to light-mediated issues. In terms of the tinnitus, most of you who follow me know I've got about 6 to 8 blogs on tinnitus. Tinnitus, I can tell you exactly why it happens if you read the blogs, but the real big issue with these things is you have to understand what porphyrias really are. If you remember the recent podcast I did with Nick Jaholmes, I talked about the Great Oxygenation Event or the Great Oxygen Holocaust. This is a period that started about 1.8 billion years ago when oxygen went from 0 to 21% slowly over that time frame. And in that time frame, key things happen, namely endosymbiosis, where simple forms of life like bacteria and archaea join forces in the first cancer event to form eukaryotes, and then eukaryotes basically created complex life. So the diseases that I just mentioned to you, these were steps in evolutionary history that brought us from endosymbiosis all the way to eukaryotes. So what people don't realize is that when these heme proteins break down, like they would have been at the Great Oxygenation Event, this is like almost fossilized evidence of what our previous evolutionary history is. So porphyrias functionally are our oxygen sensor before we had mTOR, before we had melanin, before we had just about any other sensor in the body. And you need to understand that. And why is that a big deal? Because if you understand Becker's work, the key to building complexity and regenerating comes from the DC electric current the DC electric current. Basically, we turn sunlight into that DC electric current. We use heme proteins and melanin to do it. I've laid that out pretty clear cut on the blog for people. But now that we're in the decentralized medicine blog series, now I'm taking diseases apart and showing you how they happen. So it's like the Tool song. You can only see where the disease comes from when you understand how people fall apart. So when this video goes live on Instagram, then I'm going to post what I've written about all of these little diseases in a very small, I guess you would call it, I guess antidote for people to see. Why? Because all of these things will be exploded and really laid out on my blog in extreme detail. And that way, none of you are going to have to rely on experts that are full of shit, that sell you all kinds of creams and potions and all kinds of other crap. Why is that the case? Well, I just want to remind all of you that if you go and look at Becker's book, you'll notice when he regenerated salamanders, reptiles, frogs, and humans, he didn't talk about food at all. All he talked about was a photobioelectric current that was able to do it all. And it turns out, when you understand what I'm trying to teach you, you'll learn that you can do it too. Okay? So pay attention to my first comment that I'll post after this goes live, and then you can dissect it from there. See ya.